And I think being where I'm from and seeing teachers, like Joe said, avoiding talking about it. I was a government teacher, and I was like, "What do you mean you're not going to do anything for the election? Like, what does that look like?" And then even, I would say, even coming into this past election, just seeing people not wanting to cover it, not wanting to talk about it, and I was like, "This is our voters. These kids that we teach right now, this is our future voters. That is where our future lies, and we don't want to touch it."
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of First Amendment Museum Unscripted. I'm Max Nospish, Manager of Visitor Experiences at the First Amendment Museum located in Augusta, Maine. Today, I'm joined by Joe Schmidt and Nichelle Pinkney, the co-authors of a new book entitled Civil Discourse, Classroom Conversations for Stronger Communities from Corwin Press. Joe Schmidt is the Director of Programs at the Bill of Rights Institute and the founder of Joe Schmidt Social Studies, LLC. Nichelle Pinkney is an educator, author, and consultant based out of Houston, Texas. Joe and Nichelle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks, Max.
So can you both tell me a little bit about Civil Discourse Classroom Conversations for Stronger Communities, sort of what it is?
Sure, absolutely. I'll jump in on this, get us started. So the idea of the book is both Nichelle and I have had so many conversations with educators in the past couple of years where there's been a concern about their ability to engage in conversations that many community members or parents or even other educators and students might feel are contentious ones. And we feel very strongly that this does not mean that these conversations should be avoided. That, really in First Amendment Museum, right, that freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that people need to engage in these type of conversations. And that's really what strengthens our democratic republic. And so if teachers were becoming more concerned about their ability to have these conversations, we feel that that really does impact our country and our society, and starts to move us away from that First Amendment freedom of speech rights. And so we wanted to find ways to help educators to make sure that we never lost that in our classroom, even as some of those external pressures continue to build. We wanted to try to get as many people in a school community and a community on the same page that this is a really good idea. So we brought all of our experience together, some of the things that worked, some of the things that didn't work, found some research-based best practices and ideas, and tried to pull it all together in a way that if educators follow our cubed approach, which we had a lot of ideas on the table, and thank you to our author mentor Julie Stern, who is just like, we should call this cubed because that's what's there. She pulled all the letters together for us. But if you follow this cubed approach, we think you're setting yourself up for really successful civil discourse by students who will eventually become adults in our community.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, how did you guys meet and how did you decide, hey, let's write a book together?
I'm totally gonna do this one. So we met via social media is a in education. I want to talk about how horrible it is, but no, it is not. That is how we met via social media. And then through Julie Stern actually and her work initially with visible learning for social studies. And so that was how we initially met. We actually wrote the book via how we're talking right now, via Zoom, via WhatsApp, via Twitter, via text. And so lo and behold, all the amazing things that you can do utilizing social media. And so that was how we joined together to write this masterpiece.
Yeah. So you guys are both, backgrounds in education. So did you both notice like conversations around some of these topics weren't the strongest or the healthiest? And you said, we have strategies that could improve this. Is that how sort of what inspired the book?
Absolutely. For me, this goes back to the 2016 election. I'm in a previous position where I was as a social studies specialist for a district, having schools, having teachers say, well, I don't think I'm going to teach the election this year. It's pretty contentious. I'm like, how are we not teaching the election in social studies? And then as we kind of got more and more, closer to current day, and in the pandemic, being asked to speak and present at state conferences and other groups across the country, the number one topic that I was asked to speak about was like, how do we address, these really contentious topics? How do we, get involved with that? Especially once I had done it a couple of times, people wanted to do that. And then when meeting Michelle, again, the idea that she's talking about, Nichelle and I have never met face to face, at least since we started this book. We may have been in the same room together somewhere and not known each other, but everything has been done digitally. And when we made that connection, she's like, oh yeah, I'm in on this. This is definitely something we need to be talking about. And so that's what drove it to me, just because that's what everybody was asking for.
Wow.
And I think being where I'm from and seeing teachers, like Joe said, avoiding talking about it. I was a government teacher, and I was like, what do you mean you're not going to do anything for the election? Like, what does that look like? And then even, I would say, even coming into this past election, just seeing people not wanting to cover it, not wanting to talk about it. And I was like, this is our voters. These kids that we teach right now, this is our future voters. That is where our future lies, and we don't want to touch it. And why don't we want to touch it? And then even with recent legislations across the country, teachers not wanting to even talk about certain things. So then when you allow people not to talk about things, I think that's when you prepare people to keep repeating history. That's where that saying comes, where history repeats itself. I think it's because we don't talk about it, and we don't say, oh, this was what happened. Oh, how could we have avoided this? Or what can we do not to do it again? And so I think this book allows us to really have those conversations and not be afraid to do it, but give us that safeguard to be able to challenge ourselves to have those conversations.
Yeah, is this a new phenomenon of sort of discomfort in the classroom to talk a lot about, say, something like a major national election or whatever, or what's in the news or hard history, as we call it? Is this a new phenomenon, or is this something that's been going on forever? Or
I will say no with a really, really big and. In chapter 1 of the book, one of the things that we talk about is a history of the role of education when it comes to this. And there's a quote in there from the 1850s, I believe, a Horace Mann quote, where he's indicating that there's a concern that the only things that students will learn about their government is what they are reading, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, but basically what they're reading in these very biased, politically motivated newspapers and other people. And we need to get students an education that goes beyond what the political parties are trying to tell them. And I remember finding this and going, whoa, like, okay, this is 150 years ago. And there's a documented concern by an educational leader of saying, what happens if the only information we get about our government is through very politically biased news media, right? And then you fast forward now, and I think, there's so many things out there that resonate with that piece. Now, the and that I'll put in, I'll say, no, I don't think it's unique. And I think social media has taken, I think, some of the implications and ramifications of this in our educational circles to an entirely different level, that we really see it impacting teachers, because I don't think that there's really any ability for them to escape the talking points and the attacks and the concerns and all of this that is coming around as we're thinking about what are our students being taught in our classrooms.
And I was going to say advanced technology. That I was thinking that and is advanced technology. And like we use the example that we met via social media, which is technology, right? And so that idea of what a wonderful thing that came out of that. But then when we think about the conversations that may happen in class or may not happen, or how we can even edit stuff and take out words and take out phrases to where I may say, just Joe's example right there, where he could have given that quote and then take an excerpt out and then put something else in that we've done like 2 other podcasts ago, and now that's a soundbite when it was like 4 different. It was like could have been a soundbite from years ago, right? And everyone's like, "Oh, look what he said," but it wasn't the same day. And so that technology piece that's been put out there, I think social media has really between technology and social media has really made it worse, where teachers are like, "I don't want to say anything. Like, I'm afraid of what's going to happen."
Mhm. What kind of work went into writing this book, and how long did it take?
We got pretty aggressive about making sure that this was out now in time for people to prepare for the 22-23 school year. I would say the writing of this, the heart of writing this was about 4 to 5 months before they got kind of the first send to the editor where it was kind of pulled apart, and then copy edits and stuff like that. But the real heart of this was basically the summer of 2021, late spring, early summer, where we put together this piece, and it was about putting the ideas on the table, thinking about who had expertise in these different areas, pulling those ideas together, going back and forth on each other's work, and then trying to smooth it across. Because when you have, our goal is we have 2 different people writing in there, but we want it to come across as one voice so that you really don't have as much of an idea. You know, there are places where it says, well, Nichelle has this experience, or Joe says, but outside of that, we want it to just read as one voice. And that's where some of the technology of edits and stuff like that. But yeah, it was quite a lift. And I know Nichelle feels very strongly that, yes, it was a very, very heavy lift.
It was the fastest timeline ever. But I think in a good way. And I didn't even think about this like in my role as a curriculum director, like even thinking about, oh, wait, we did this in a good time, Joe. And I bet you we didn't even think about this, but we just talked about, we both gave examples about how people we worked with did not even want to get into the elections. They didn't even want to do this. And lo and behold, our book is going to be out just in time for people to know how to talk about the election. Like, how wonderful would that be? But that was not our intent. And I literally, it just hit me sitting here because I was planning a lesson for the election to help
Yeah.
teachers out. But it just hit me, wait, our book will be out in time for people to read it and apply before it even happens.
Yeah, good timing. One thing that I'm fascinated by with the title is it's Civil Discourse, Classroom Conversations for Stronger Communities. That's interesting. You know, given what seems to be the nature of this book, I would say, oh, civil discourse, classroom conversations for preserving democracy or understanding our government. But no, you say stronger communities. So can you tell me how this book can build stronger communities and what that means and looks like?
People have to have conversations. I think one of the biggest things when we chose that part of the title was about that when we do this, when we allow those conversations to happen, when we understand each other, because when you have these conversations, that does not mean that we agree. That just means that we've had these conversations. I understand where Joe's come from. I understand where Maxwell's come from. But even though we understand each other, that doesn't change that we are being stronger because I understand where you're coming from. I at least have that understanding. I at least have that compassion. I at least have that empathy, whether or not I agree with everything you said at the end of the day. We've had those conversations, and I feel like that's the piece that's going to bring us together is because those conversations. I even think about us writing this book. Well, we've had times where we've literally been on Zoom and I've no, I don't agree. And Joe's like, but hear this, and we've gotten to see different aspects. We're from different walks of life, but we were able to come together and see each other's worth and value and understanding where we came from to make certain things work and happen. And I think that's the piece that having those conversations, having that discourse, and having those guardrails to be able to say, hey, this is what happens. We're all not going to get along, but we can understand each other. We can make people feel like they belong within the society that we're in and within the community and have empathy for those things that we may not understand or from our different walks of life.
Max, I agree with the potential topics that you throw out there as well. And I just think it's an and. and an and again, I always try to think about the audience here, the First Amendment Museum, freedom of the press. It's those things, and hopefully the ability to allow multiple media outlets to come to a place. And even if they don't agree, like Nichelle said, that doesn't mean we get rid of freedom of speech. That doesn't mean we should start banning a certain news media from coming and reporting or covering or doing this. And by, like you said, saving democracy or working better with our local newspapers and media, or like it might not even be government related. It might be a situation that's happened in a community that's really striking at not only the students or school, but the people, right? That it might be a divisive issue in that. If we can pull that together, all of those components lead us to a stronger community. And I know one of the things that we write about is every community has problems. Every community needs to address problems. And I don't think we will ever be better off by minimizing the number of people and ideas sitting at a table. And if we say, well, I'm only going to work with those I agree with, you're minimizing the number of people. And the best idea for your community, and it might be a classroom community, it might be a school community, it might be your town, is to have all those voices. And at the end of the day, be able to walk away and say, okay, I said my piece. My piece was not the overall accepted idea, but we've heard everybody out. And I think that's where it's that community piece, because that's the heart of everything that we think can be approved by our ability to talk with one another.
Yeah, and is this a book that would someone who's not a teacher or educator get a lot out of this book? Nichelle, you're going.
I would say yes, at least the first 2 to 3 chapters. I think that they would. I mean, when you get into teaching strategies, that one may be a little more difficult, but even then, I think it even helps you have those conversations. When I think about going to dinner parties or places like that where conversations come up and you're like, oh, how do I respond to that? And I have friends from different walks of life, different belief systems, I mean, if I put the spectrum, you'd be like, really? Those are our friends, but we all know how to have those conversations. And so some of those strategies may help them, but I think especially those first few chapters help you to at least understand how we're in a place that we're in right now where those conversations are difficult to happen.
Chapter 2 is about a shared understanding, and it's some of those words. And I was actually talking about this in a different context earlier this week, but one of the big examples we do in chapter 2 is misinformation and disinformation and fake news. And I think there's a lot of conversations that bog down just in like arguing over those terms, and you never even get to the root of the problem. And so I think just that idea right there, again, Max, in your world of that First Amendment Museum, like if we're going to have any conversations about this, we all need to at least be on a same starting page with what we're talking about, right? Here's the terms, here's how we're going to use it, here's what it means. We can still 100% disagree in the end, but I don't think we can have the conversations get bogged down in arguing about, well, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? No, it's really more of a policy issue. Okay, here's this. Now, what should we do about it? And that's just like one of the examples, though. But I think just that idea, if you're going to have a discussion with somebody, make sure you understand what you're actually talking about so that you're not just talking past one another over and over again. And the example that I'll steal from Thinker Analytics and argument mapping when they do their trainings, they'll talk about like the greatest of all time, right? We're here in New England. Let's talk about the greatest of all time. Is Tom Brady the greatest? Well, and see, Nichelle's like giving me that look, right? But how are we defining the greatest? And in their example, they say somebody might say Peyton Manning, somebody might say John Elway, somebody might say Brett Favre, somebody might say Aaron Rodgers, somebody. But if we get to the understanding, okay, what we're not debating is who's the greatest of all time. We're debating how do you define it? Because if it's most Super Bowl wins, end of discussion, right? We have it. If it's most passing yards, end of discussion. If it's most like, these things are settleable. And so really, instead of saying, no, it's Tom Brady, no, it's Peyton Manning, the heart of the discussion, you have to have a shared understanding of what you're actually trying to figure out.
Yeah, and do you think people underestimate students' ability to have civil discourse and have these tough conversations in the classroom?
100%. 100%. I think they automatically think that I would argue that I think students are more likely to be able to have these conversations than adults. Like I genuinely, I do. And the reason why is because they are at a point where they are more accepting of things. They are more willing to, especially if the guidelines are set, because you can't just walk into the classroom and walk in with students and say, hey, I'm going to use Joe's example of the greatest. I mean, I'm in Texas, so let's just, I don't know. He didn't mention any Southern teams in there, but they would totally have a different argument. But I can't just walk in and do that. I have to set a tone for this. I have to set different guidelines for us to get there. But when you do that, I think they are more willing because they are more open than, I hate to say adults sometimes, but they are more open to try and to follow that. And then even in my experience, I've seen students want to do it again. Let's have these conversations again. What are we going to talk about this week? Oh, I didn't have that plan, guys. And they want to do it again. Like, when are we going to do this again? Over things that weren't curriculum based to things that were curriculum based. Actually, that's how you get them into it. You use things that's not curriculum based, i.e., who's the greatest of all time. And then that idea of bringing them in and really getting that conversation, then going into, was Madison a proponent of all of these components of the Constitution? And then they're like, oh, we've modeled this before with something else.
Mm-hmm.
Passing yards, Drew Brees. There's Saints. That help? Is that helpful?
I mean, I guess we can add that. I mean,
She
this is draft season. Don't get me started. Like,
probably won't. Troy Aikman. We'll throw Troy
yes,
Aikman
there
in
we go.
to
There
help
we
with this.
go.
But so Mac, I think because one of the things we talk about is it's a skill, right? And so we encourage teachers to help students practice the skill. And I think a lot of what Nichelle is saying, like if we've gone the past 20 years and adults coming out of those places, or if it really wasn't a focus 30 years ago, very implicitly, we assume, well, you're 30, you're 40, you're an adult, you must be able to have these conversations. But it's a skill. It's just like somebody driving a car has to practice the skill. And if you haven't had a lot of practice, we kind of understand like, oh yeah, new drivers aren't good drivers. And so if we've never really practiced the skill, then we'd also have to say like, oh, people new to civil discourse aren't going to be good at civil discourse.
Right.
And so the idea that the students, and exactly like Nichelle said, right, in this controlled environment, we don't tell you just go practice it, go do it however you want. You set this stage to where kids are practicing a skill that, like any other skill, they're going to get better in time. And so I think we would say in these right environments, students have had more practice and therefore probably will do better in those circumstances.
Yeah, and last question before we kind of get into where people can buy the book and that sort of thing. What are you most proud of about this book, or the process that went into creating it?
I think I'm most proud of my new friendship with Nichelle and the awesomeness we put in there. That there's something to point to. I love the strategies. I love the piece. I think it's thoughtful. And the people we had do a lot of reviews, I think we heard, right? It makes sense as you're walking through that it's something people can do, right? And it's not a how to paint by numbers, but it really kind of gets you to that point. And in a time where there's so many educators worried about something like this, I'm most proud of the ability to say here, like, just read through this and really think about your community, your students, and who you are. Because we do leave that open, right? It's not prescriptive. It's not do this, do this, do this. That's why it's not really a paint by numbers. But I think if you take into account where you're at, who your kids are, and who you are as a human being and as an educator, I think just about anybody can take this journey with us and come out on the other end feeling more capable of doing this work.
And I would say I'm most proud that we accomplished this together. Like when we talk about how we did this all, like we have literally never been in the same room that we know of, but were able to accomplish something so that allows teachers to have this framework, and allows them to have these guardrails to even go through. And like Joe said, it is not, I would say, I'm going to take the painting by numbers with a twist. That twist that you can adapt it to where you are. And there may be some people that read in like, I'm really strong here. I feel like I'm strong here, but oh wait, I didn't feel that build that contract at the beginning. So maybe that's why the first time I did it, it worked. Second time, third time, it was kind of shaky. Like it depends on where I am. And so seeing where they fall in that spectrum, and just really being able to build this with someone like Joe, and to grow with him throughout this process. Cause I learned a lot writing this, and I learned a lot on, wow, this is why it worked when I did this and this. Cause sometimes we don't even know why it's working until you really dig deeper. And so working with Joe on this, it was a lot of times where I was just in awe, and I'm in awe. Like I can't wait to the box. Every time a box arrives in my house, I'm hoping that it's that, and it's not. And I'm like, where's my book?
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. So when does the book come out and where can people get it?
At this point now, it's no longer a pre-order in different places. Although, it's my understanding, it's still in warehouses and they're starting to do the packaging up. So as Nichelle said, it's our understanding we should any day now be receiving our first copies. Once they get them, they send those first copies out to the authors. If it's been, you can order it through Corwin Press directly. It's available on Amazon. It takes just a little bit longer through Amazon right now because it needs to go from Corwin to Amazon and then go out from there. If it's Corwin, it's direct from Corwin. But basically, at any order now, you should be getting it within a handful of weeks. And again, that's available through Corwin Press. If you just search Civil Discourse through Corwin or on Amazon with either of our names in the book, you can go ahead and get those orders right in.
Awesome. All right, Joe and Nichelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Good luck with the book. Looking forward to
Thank you,
reading it.
Max.
Thank you,
All right,
Matt.
thank you guys. Bye.